April 30th, 1945. A farmhouse cellar somewhere in Bavaria. An American sergeant from Pennsylvania pushes open a wooden door and finds 3 SS officers sitting at a table, their black uniforms still immaculate, their sidearms already placed in front of them in surrender. But the sergeant's eyes do not go to the Lugers. They go to the belts, to the black-handled daggers hanging at each man's side. He had spent the previous 4 years fighting across North Africa, Italy, and France. He had earned a Bronze Star and 2 Purple Hearts. But 60 years later, when his grandson asks what he brought home from the war, he will not mention medals. He will walk to a locked cabinet, pull out a velvet-lined box, and reveal a blade etched with words he never learned to pronounce. Minor, Era heist, Troja. My honour is loyalty, the motto of the SS. The dagger he took from that cellar was worth more to him than anything else he captured in 4 years of combat. More than the Luger pistols every soldier wanted, more than cameras or flags or iron crosses. This is the story of why. We are not admiring these objects. We are examining how symbols of terror became trophies and what that says about war and memory. To understand why American and British soldiers became obsessed with these daggers, you first need to understand what the SS represented to the men who fought against them. By 1944, Allied intelligence had compiled extensive dossiers on Heinrich Himmler's organisation. The soldiers landing at Normandy knew they were not just fighting the German army. They were fighting the organisation responsible for the concentration camps, the mass shootings in Eastern Europe, the fanatical resistance that made every hedgerow a potential death trap. SS units were notorious for fighting longer, surrendering later, and committing atrocities that even hardened combat veterans found difficult to describe. Regular Wehrmacht troops sometimes gave up when surrounded or outgunned. SS units often did not. And SS units wore a very particular symbol on their belts. A black-handled dagger bearing lightning bolt runes, a national eagle, and a motto etched in Gothic script. To capture one of these daggers meant something different than capturing a standard German army knife. It meant you had faced the enemy your officers warned you about, the true believers, the ones your training films called fanatical, and you had won. John Steinbeck, the famous American novelist who served as a war correspondent, captured the Allied obsession with German souvenirs in a single observation. While the Germans fight for world domination and the English for the defense of England, he wrote, "The Americans fight for souvenirs. The numbers support his claim." One oft-cited example comes from the 28th Infantry Division, which reportedly left Europe with around 20,000 war trophies for its 5,000 men. That works out to an average of 4 souvenirs per soldier. Across the entire European theatre, millions of items made the journey back to America and Britain. Helmets, flags, medals, uniforms, weapons of every description. But certain items commanded special status. The Luger pistol was king, and the SS dagger was its dark prince. Veterans would trade almost anything for either one. They would risk their lives to obtain them, and they would keep them for decades, passing them down through generations as tangible connections to what they had done and who they had defeated. The American military recognized this psychology almost immediately. On August 31st, 1944, the War Department issued Circular Number 353, formally authorizing the collection of war trophies to, and these are the official words, improve the morale of forces in the theaters of operations. The regulations specified that soldiers could retain enemy equipment not containing explosives whose trophy value outweighed military usefulness. Each item required a certificate signed by a superior officer stating the bearer was officially authorized by the theater commander to possess it. The Customs Bureau collected 1 copy, bearers retained the original. Daggers qualified easily under these rules. They contained no explosives. They had no military usefulness beyond their ceremonial function, and their trophy value was beyond question. The SS service dagger, with its unmistakable black grip and runic symbols, became officially sanctioned proof of combat service. A government-approved souvenir of victory over fascism. The psychology behind trophy hunting runs deeper than simple greed or the desire for mementos. Professor Simon Harrison's academic study, published under the title Dark Trophies, identifies the behaviour as rooted in what he calls an animal hunting schema that strips the enemy of his humanity. Soldiers who collected enemy equipment were not just gathering souvenirs. They were proving prowess, masculinity, control, and what Harrison terms generativity, the desire to create something lasting. A 2010 Ohio University thesis by researcher Seth Givens found that soldiers collected to immortalize themselves. Given the constant risk of death, souvenirs ensured their legacy would continue through physical artifacts even if they fell in battle. The trophy proved you had been there. It proved you had survived when others did not. And it proved you had won against an enemy who wanted to kill you. SS daggers fit perfectly into this psychological framework. They were not just items taken from a defeated enemy. They were items taken from a feared enemy. An enemy whose very symbols inspired dread across occupied Europe. To possess those symbols, to transform them from markers of terror into markers of victory, satisfied a deep psychological need that went beyond rational explanation. The 1933 model SS service dagger did not emerge from a weapons factory. It emerged from Heinrich Himmler's obsession with creating a new order of Teutonic knights. On December 15, 1933, Himmler formally introduced what he called the Ehrendolch, the honor dagger, for members of his rapidly expanding organization. The design deliberately echoed 16th century Swiss daggers depicted in paintings by Hans Holbein the Younger. Himmler wanted his men to see themselves not as political thugs or street brawlers, but as heirs to a medieval warrior tradition stretching back centuries. The blade measured approximately 22 centimeters in length, double-edged, with a distinctive fuller running down the center. The grip was made from black-dyed ebony, carefully shaped to fit comfortably in the hand, inset with a nickel-silver roundel bearing the twin lightning bolt SS runes. Above the grip sat a nickel-silver crossguard featuring an eagle clutching a swastika in its talons. Below it, a matching pommel completed the assembly. And on the blade itself, acid etched in Gothic black-letter script, the motto that would come to symbolize everything the Allies were fighting against. Meine Ehre heißt Treue. My honor is loyalty. Himmler did not simply hand these daggers out like equipment from a quartermaster. He created elaborate rituals around their presentation, designed to bind recipients to the organization with almost religious fervor. Every November 9th, the anniversary of Hitler's failed 1923 beer hall putsch in Munich, S-men gathered at the Feldherrnhalle Memorial to receive their daggers in torchlit ceremonies designed to invoke the spirit of medieval knighthood. The date was sacred in Nazi mythology. November 9th was the day the movement's first martyrs had fallen, shot by Bavarian police as Hitler led his followers toward the center of Munich. Receiving your dagger on that date connected you to a blood sacrifice stretching back to the movement's earliest days. It made you part of something larger than yourself. Himmler understood the psychology of symbols better than almost anyone in the Nazi hierarchy. He knew that a man who received his dagger in a torchlit ceremony, surrounded by his black uniformed comrades, sworn to loyalty unto death, would feel differently about that weapon than a soldier who simply drew equipment from a supply depot. The dagger was not just a blade, it was an oath made physical. It was commitment you could hold in your hand. The numbers tell the scale of what Himmler built with these rituals and symbols. In 1929, the SS numbered fewer than 300 men. By 1933, when the first daggers were issued, membership had grown to over 52,000. By 1939, when war began, the SS had expanded to more than 250,000 members. By 1944, when Allied soldiers began encountering SS units in significant numbers, the organization had grown to over 800,000 men serving in combat units, concentration camp guard battalions, and rear area security forces. In the pre-war years and early war period, the dagger became the iconic SS dress sidearm. Production records are incomplete, destroyed in the chaos of Germany's collapse or lost in bombed-out factories. But historians estimate that German manufacturers produced several 100,000 SS daggers before production was suspended around 1940, with the last examples appearing by 1942 as materials were diverted to weapons that could actually kill. Not every SS man kept his dagger. Some were lost in combat, some were stolen by comrades. Some were confiscated after disciplinary actions. Some were simply abandoned when carrying them became more trouble than they were worth. But by the time American and British soldiers began pushing into Germany in the final months of the war, hundreds of thousands of these daggers existed, scattered across the Reich. And the Allies wanted every single one. The daggers were manufactured primarily in Solingen, a small city in western Germany that had been producing blades for over 400 years. By the 1930s, Solingen was home to approximately 250 blade manufacturers, from tiny family workshops passed down through generations to industrial factories employing hundreds of workers. The city's reputation for quality cutlery was unmatched anywhere in the world. Sheffield in England produced fine steel, Toledo in Spain had its traditions, but Solingen was the undisputed capital of blade making. The Nazi Party's procurement office, called the Reichszeugmeisterei, or RZM, awarded dagger contracts only to manufacturers who met strict quality standards. Each approved maker received a code number stamped on their products. These codes appear on authentic daggers, allowing modern collectors and authenticators to trace each piece back to its original manufacturer. But to the American GI liberating a German town in 1945, these codes meant nothing. What mattered was the quality he could feel in his hand, the balance, the sharpness, the obvious craftsmanship that separated a Solingen blade from a mass-produced imitation. Carl Eichhorn of Solingen emerged as the most prestigious SS dagger manufacturer. The company traced its blade, making heritage back 5 centuries to the time when Solingen first became known as the City of Blades. Its trademark, a seated squirrel, became synonymous with the highest quality Nazi-edged weapons. Robert Class, bearing the famous Kissing Cranes maker's mark, two stylized stalks facing each other, produced far fewer pieces, making their work exceptionally valuable today. Collectors will pay substantial premiums for the Kissing Cranes mark over more common manufacturers. Boker, operating under its distinctive tree brand logo called the Baumwerk, manufactured daggers until Allied firebombing destroyed the factory entirely. The company would rebuild after the war and continues producing quality knives today, but the wartime production facility was reduced to rubble. Each manufacturer brought its own traditions and specialties to the work, but all shared the same commitment to quality that had made Solingen steel famous throughout the world. When an American sergeant picked up an SS dagger in 1945, he was holding 4 centuries of metallurgical expertise. He could feel it in the balance. He could see it in the mirror polish of the blade. He could test it on his thumb and know immediately that this was not some cheap mass-produced item stamped out by a factory. This was craftsmanship. This was art. This was something worth keeping. Early production daggers from 1933 to 1935 featured solid nickel-silver fittings, superior blade polish achieved through multiple stages of hand finishing, and components assembled by individual craftsmen whose bench numbers appeared stamped on crossguards. Each grip underwent a final fitting process. Parts were not interchangeable as in modern manufacturing. If you took apart an early SS dagger and mixed its components with another, the pieces would not fit properly together. They had been shaped to match each other specifically. The distinctive cross-graining texture from factory final polish remains today the single most important authentication marker for genuine wartime German blades. This finish resulted from the specific polishing wheels and compounds used in Solingen workshops. Forgers can copy the shape of a dagger. They can copy the inscriptions and the runic symbols, but they cannot easily replicate the specific surface finish that Solingen craftsmen achieved through techniques refined over generations. The grain pattern is like a fingerprint. Experts can identify it immediately, and its absence marks a piece as reproduction or fake. Later war production from 1939 onwards showed declining quality as Germany's resources dwindled under the pressure of a two-front war. Nickel-plated brass replaced solid nickel-silver as the Reich's supply of strategic metals ran short. Painted finishes substituted for anodized metal because the chemicals and equipment required for proper anodizing were needed elsewhere. Aluminium castings appeared where detailed handwork once existed. The master craftsmen who had spent decades perfecting their skills were drafted into the Wehrmacht or transferred to weapons factories, producing items more immediately useful than ceremonial daggers. Their places were taken by less skilled workers, sometimes forced laborers who had no investment in quality. This degradation in materials and workmanship is visible to experienced collectors. Late war daggers look different from early examples. The fittings are lighter. The finish is duller. The overall impression is of something made quickly rather than carefully. Ironically, this quality degradation makes early examples even more desirable to modern collectors. A mint condition 1933 or 34 dagger with solid nickel fittings and perfect polish commands a substantial premium over a 1940 piece with wartime economy features. But to the soldier in 1945, any SS dagger was valuable. Early or late production made no difference to him. What mattered was the lightning bolt runes on the grip. What mattered was the Gothic script on the blade. What mattered was the organisation it represented, and the fact that he now possessed its symbol. In 1936, Himmler introduced a new variant that would become even more coveted than the standard service dagger. The model 1936 chain dagger was reserved exclusively for what the Nazis called Alte Kämpfer, Old Guard members who had joined the SS before Hitler took power in January 1933, or who held officer ranks as of November 1935. This was not a weapon for everyone. This was a badge of seniority and commitment, marking its bearer as one of the original true believers. The dagger itself was similar to the 1933 pattern, but instead of simple leather hangers suspending it from the belt, it featured an ornate chain assembly designed by Professor Karl Dieppe. The chain consisted of rectangular plaques adorned with death's head skulls and SS runes, connected by silver fittings featuring the so-called Wotan's Knot swastika motif. The death's head motif that became so associated with SS iconography appeared prominently on these chains, making the chain dagger immediately recognizable as something special. The effect was impressive and unmistakable. A man wearing the chain dagger announced his status to everyone who saw him. He was not just SS, he was Old Guard SS. He had been there from the beginning. The chains themselves underwent design evolution as production continued. Early 1936 to 37, examples featured solid nickel-silver construction, with high-relief skulls that stood out dramatically from the background. The craftsmanship on these early chains was remarkable, each link carefully finished and assembled. Later versions used nickel-plated steel as materials became scarcer, with lower relief skulls and less precise detailing. Collectors today can date chain daggers by examining chain construction, identifying subtle differences that indicate early, middle, or late production. To capture a chain dagger meant you had captured or killed an SS officer. a senior man who had committed to Hitler's cause before it was popular or safe to do so. Veterans who brought home chained daggers knew they possessed something rarer and more significant than the standard enlisted model. They had taken a trophy from the enemy's leadership. Today, the 1936 chained variant commands prices 3 to 6 times higher than the basic 1933 pattern. A standard SS dagger might sell for $2,000. A comparable chained dagger might bring $10,000 or more. Larry Decuers, former curator at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, described the dangerous intensity of the Allied desire for German souvenirs. In many cases, GIs risked life and limb to score war trophies from the enemy, and the Germans knew that GIs were more than willing to do it. As German forces retreated across France and into the Reich itself, they deliberately left attractive souvenirs behind. Helmets placed conspicuously on tables, pistols lying on chairs, daggers hung from doorknobs. The items looked like hasty abandonment by retreating troops, but they were traps. Booby trapped with grenades or explosives, wired to detonate when the item was moved. The hope was that a wide-eyed American would grab the shiny object and die for his curiosity. Many soldiers paid the ultimate price in their quest for the ultimate war trophy. The practice became so common that units issued specific warnings about touching abandoned German equipment. Check everything for wires. Assume nothing is safe. Let the engineers clear it first. But these warnings could not overcome the primal desire to possess a tangible piece of victory. Soldiers still grabbed for trophies, some died doing it. And those who survived and succeeded valued their prizes all the more for the risk they had taken to obtain them. The SS dagger held particular significance for Jewish American soldiers serving in the European theatre. Approximately 550,000 Jews served in the United States Armed Forces during World War II. Many were assigned to European operations. Many encountered concentration camps as the Allies advanced, and many understood better than their Christian comrades exactly what the SS represented. Robert Brand served as a signal operator and German translator as his unit advanced through the collapsing Reich in the spring of 1945. In one German house his unit occupied, soldiers discovered uniforms and military equipment that retreating troops had abandoned. Among the items was an SS dagger. Brand kept it. For him, the dagger was not just a trophy in the ordinary sense. It was a symbol of the defeat of the persecutors of his people. It represented something larger than personal victory. It represented the destruction of an organization dedicated to the murder of every Jew in Europe. Decades later, Brand donated that dagger to Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. The plaque beside it explains that a Jewish American soldier took this weapon from the organization that murdered 6 million of his kinsmen. That context transforms a piece of steel into something approaching sacred, a testament to survival, a memorial to the dead, and a reminder that evil, no matter how powerful it appears, can be defeated by those willing to fight it. The hunt for SS daggers operated within a complex economy that sprang up almost immediately after Allied forces entered German territory. Cigarettes served as the primary currency of this underground market. The American military provided soldiers with cigarettes at heavily subsidized prices through post exchanges. A pack cost only a few cents. But in post-war Germany, where the economy had collapsed and the Reichsmark was worthless, those same cigarettes became extraordinarily valuable. A single cigarette in Berlin could sell for $1 or more on the black market. A full pack might fetch dozens of dollars. Soldiers quickly realized they could buy cigarettes cheap and sell them dear, accumulating funds to purchase whatever they wanted from desperate German civilians or from each other. Within this economy, German military equipment had established values. A standard steel helmet was worth about 1 pack of cigarettes. A dress dagger from the regular army might bring 3 or 4 packs. A Luger pistol commanded a carton or more. And an SS dagger was valued nearly as highly as the legendary Luger itself. Bill Mauldin's famous Stars and Stripes cartoon captured the phenomenon with dark humor. A group of German prisoners offers their American captors a price list of their possessions. Luger, $100. Camera, $150. Iron Cross, $12. The caption reads, "It is good to be captured by Americans." Combat infantry had first access to trophies but limited carrying capacity. A rifleman could not haul boxes of souvenirs through hedgerows and minefields. Every extra pound slowed him down. Every bulky item complicated his movement. So they traded with rear echelon troops who had vehicles and storage space. Mechanized and armored units became eager buyers, paying premium prices for items combat soldiers could not carry. At each step in the sales chain, the price tended to increase. AGI, who captured a dagger in combat, might trade it to a tank crew for a case of beer. The tank crew might sell it to a supply sergeant for $50. The supply sergeant might offer it to an officer for $100. Rear echelon troops rushed to front lines after battles specifically to claim what combat soldiers had left behind. Military police tried to regulate the trade, but found the task impossible. The demand was too high, the supply too scattered, and the motivation too strong. Everyone wanted something. and the SS dagger, portable, recognizable, and laden with meaning, moved easily through this underground economy. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. Now let us examine how these daggers were actually captured and what they are worth today. The most detailed documented SS dagger capture account in the historical record comes from Ernest P. Lee of the 2nd Infantry Division. A few days after American forces captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact, the first major Allied bridgehead across the Rhine, Lee was detained in a small German village due to a flat tire on his motorcycle. While waiting for repair, he investigated a civilian home and discovered 2 German soldiers hiding inside. One was an enlisted man in regular Wehrmacht uniform. The other was an SS major, still wearing his black tunic with silver insignia. Their uniforms had been concealed in a grain bin, an attempt to pass as civilians that had failed. Lee forced both men to don their uniforms again, describing the fit as perfect. He then confiscated a Himmler presentation dagger from the SS major, one of the rarest variants ever produced, given personally by the Reichsführer SS to senior officers. Lee turned both prisoners over to a quartermaster truck and kept the dagger. He held onto it until 1976, more than 30 years, when he finally sold it along with an original letter certifying the circumstances of its liberation. That documented provenance, a first-person account written and signed by the veteran himself, describing exactly when and where and how he obtained the piece, significantly enhanced its collector value. Today, daggers with capture papers command substantial premiums over identical pieces lacking documentation. The paper trail proves authenticity in a market plagued by fakes. Perhaps the most emotionally charged capture account involves a dagger taken during the liberation of Dachau concentration camp. A survivor of the camp and his father took an SS dagger from an officer as they were being liberated by American forces in late April 1945. That piece has been appraised at several $1,000s, but its true value cannot be measured in any currency. A victim of the SS's crimes took a weapon from his persecutors at the moment of liberation. The dagger passed from torturer to tortured, from oppressor to survivor, from symbol of absolute power to testament of ultimate defeat. The child who was there that day grew up carrying that memory. The dagger became proof that the nightmare had ended, that his father had survived, that they had walked out of hell carrying a piece of their tormentor's regalia as evidence of what had happened and who had won. During the war itself, an SS dagger commanded trade value equivalent to a Luger pistol, placing it at the highest tier of desirable trophies. The Luger was undisputed king of war souvenirs. Ask any World War II veteran of the European theatre what the most prized war souvenir was, one historian wrote, and the answer will invariably come back: a Luger. The elegant toggle action pistol had achieved almost mythical status among American troops. But daggers ran a close second, prized for their craftsmanship, their symbolism, and most importantly, their portability. You could mail a dagger home without the extensive paperwork required for firearms. Weapons capable of being concealed on the person were explicitly forbidden from the mail, but daggers were not firearms. A soldier could wrap one in cloth, pack it in a box, and send it to his mother in Kansas without filling out forms or obtaining special permits. You could hide a dagger in your pack during inspections more easily than a pistol. And you could display it on a mantelpiece back home without worrying about local gun laws or registration requirements. For soldiers who wanted tangible evidence of their service but did not want to deal with weapons regulations, the SS dagger was the perfect trophy. Standard SS 1933 enlisted men's daggers sell today for between $1,200 and $3,500 in fair condition. Fair means the piece shows honest wear from age and handling but retains all original components without significant damage. Mint condition examples with original scabbards, hangers, and all fittings intact command $3,500 to $7,000 or more. The 1936 chained officers variant brings $6,000 to $18,000 depending on chain type, condition, and documented history. By comparison, standard German army daggers bring $300 to $1,000. Hitler Youth knives sell for $150 to $750. SS daggers consistently command several times the value of comparable pieces from other German organizations. This differential has held steady for decades and shows no sign of narrowing. The broader market for Nazi militaria is substantial, though exact figures are difficult to verify. This trade operates in a complex legal and ethical environment that varies dramatically by country. In Germany, Section 86A of the Criminal Code bans public use or display of Nazi symbols, though private ownership of historical items remains legal for educational and collecting purposes. Austria imposes similar restrictions. France prohibits sales entirely. The United States and United Kingdom impose no legal restrictions on sale or possession, treating Nazi artifacts the same as any other historical items. Major auction houses have made their own choices independent of legal requirements. Christie's, Sotheby's, and Bonhams all refuse to handle Nazi memorabilia on ethical grounds, turning away consignments regardless of value or historical significance. This policy pushes the market to specialized dealers like Alexander Historical Auctions in the United States and Hermann Historica in Germany, who regularly face criticism but continue to operate within the law. eBay banned most Nazi items in 2003, prohibiting post-1933 items with swastikas and other Nazi symbols, while creating exemptions for period coins, stamps, books, and literature. This restriction pushed trading to specialized platforms, private dealer networks, and militaria shows where transactions occur face-to-face. The ethical debate around collecting Nazi artifacts remains unresolved, and probably always will. Rabbi Menachem Margolin of the European Jewish Association argues that auctions give succor to those who idealize what the Nazi Party stood for, while offering buyers the chance to titillate a guest or loved one with an item belonging to a genocidal murderer. Critics worry about neo-Nazi buyers creating basement shrines to Hitler's regime, rooms filled with swastika flags and SS regalia, where disturbed individuals can immerse themselves in fantasy. The concern is not theoretical. Police raids have uncovered such collections. Arrests have been made. Buyers at auction do not have to explain their motives or pass background checks. They simply have to pay. The market does not discriminate between historians and fanatics. But defenders of the trade offer counter-arguments that deserve consideration. Collecting preserves historical evidence. Never forget, they argue, requires maintaining physical artifacts that document what happened. Museums cannot display objects that do not exist. If private collectors do not preserve these items, many would simply be destroyed, lost to rust and decay, and deliberate disposal by family members embarrassed to own such things. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum accepts donations of Nazi items, recognizing their documentary value even as it refuses to purchase them. The truth likely lies somewhere between these positions. Some collectors are genuine historians seeking to preserve evidence. Some are investors treating rare objects as alternative assets that appreciate over time. Some are descendants of veterans honoring family history. And some, undoubtedly, are people whose interest in the Third Reich goes beyond academic curiosity. The market serves them all without distinction. The high values commanded by SS daggers have made them prime targets for forgers operating at industrial scale. Bill Shea, a World War II historian and founder of the military memorabilia shop called the Ruptured Duck, recalls buying his first Hitler Youth knife, an SA dagger, in 1961 at age 16 from a classmate whose father had brought them back from overseas. The price seemed like a king's ransom and amounted to 3 weeks' wages from his 2 paper routes. That transaction took place in an era when fakes were relatively rare. Most daggers on the market had genuine provenance, brought home by veterans who were still alive to confirm their stories. Today, the situation has changed dramatically. Lakeside Trader, a major dealer operating since 1976, warns collectors that SS daggers command 5 times the price of an SA dagger. For this reason, fakers have focused their efforts on SS rather than SA items. The profit margin justifies the investment in tooling and expertise required to produce convincing fakes. Lakeside Trader recommends that beginners buy from established dealers with return policies rather than auction sites where authentication is uncertain and recourse limited. In 2019, a large trove of supposed Nazi artifacts discovered in Argentina generated international headlines before experts determined the entire collection was fake. Sophisticated reproductions created to exploit collector demand. The lesson is clear. Expertise matters, provenance matters, and skepticism is always warranted. Authentication depends on subtle details that require years of study to recognize reliably. The cross-graining texture from factory polish is extremely difficult to replicate because it resulted from specific techniques and equipment no longer in common use. Genuine blades are magnetic carbon steel, while many reproductions use modern alloys with different magnetic properties and telltale surface finishes. Components should fit precisely in ways that indicate hand assembly rather than modern machine production with interchangeable parts. Materials should be period appropriate in ways that require knowledge of German industrial history to verify. Expert authenticators like Thomas Whitman provide certification for rare pieces, examining items under magnification and comparing them to documented genuine examples. Their opinions can add thousands of dollars to a dagger's value or condemn it as worthless reproduction. Daggers with original capture papers command significant premiums, precisely because documentation eliminates doubt about authenticity and origin. When a veteran signed a letter describing exactly how, where, and when he obtained a dagger, that documentation became part of the object's history forever. Ernest Lee's dagger, with his signed letter describing the capture of an SS major near Remagen, tells a complete story. The dagger alone would be valuable. The dagger with its letter is irreplaceable, a verified artifact with unbroken chain of custody from battlefield to present day. As the World War II generation passes, no new capture stories can be documented with first-person testimony. The supply of authenticated provenance is fixed and shrinking every day. Every veteran who dies takes his memories with him. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project has collected over 64,000 personal narratives from World War II veterans. The Imperial War Museum's Sound Archive holds over 33,000 recordings. But these represent a tiny fraction of the 16 million Americans and millions more British, Canadian, and other Allied soldiers who served. Most stories were never recorded. Most daggers have lost their narratives forever. The SS dagger's journey from Nazi ceremonial weapon to Allied war trophy to controversial collectible traces the arc of how we remember World War II itself. In 1945, these daggers meant victory. They meant survival when millions had died. They meant you had done your part to defeat history's greatest evil. Veterans displayed them proudly on mantelpieces and in glass cases. They showed them to children and grandchildren as tangible connections to the most important event of the 20th century. The daggers were conversation pieces, evidence of service, memorial objects linking past to present. The generation that fought World War II is nearly gone now. The youngest veterans, those who enlisted in the final months of the war, are approaching 100 years old. Within a decade, perhaps less, none will remain alive. When they pass, they take the living memory of what those trophies meant with them. A grandchild inheriting an SS dagger today cannot know what his grandfather felt when he took it from a surrendering officer in Bavaria in the spring of 1945. He cannot know the fear that preceded that moment, the months of combat, the friends who did not survive, the relief and exhaustion and triumph that charged the instant when an enemy placed his dagger in American hands. He can only know what the history books tell him, and history books, for all their value, cannot capture everything. Some things can only be understood by those who lived them. The dagger remains, the meaning fades, and eventually, only the artifact survives, silent and cold, waiting for someone to ask what it meant and why it mattered. Today, these daggers sit in museum collections and private safes, in estate sales and auction catalogues, in documentary evidence files and family heirlooms passed down through generations. Their value in dollars continues to rise as authentic pieces become scarcer with each passing year and demand from collectors remains steady, but their true value was never monetary, it was always symbolic. A young sergeant from Pennsylvania saw 3 SS officers with daggers on their belts and understood immediately what those daggers represented. He understood the organization that wore them. He understood the atrocities that organization had committed across Europe. He understood the camps and the shootings and the fanatical resistance. And he understood that by taking those daggers, by stripping them from men who had worn them as symbols of power and terror, he was completing an act that went beyond any military objective. The hunters had become the hunted, the persecutors had become the prisoners, and the symbols of terror had become trophies of victory for the men who destroyed the regime that created them. That sergeant kept his dagger for 60 years. He never sold it despite offers that would have paid for a new car. He never traded it for anything regardless of value. He never forgot what it meant to take it from an SS officer's belt on the 30th of April, 1945. When his grandson asked him about the war, the sergeant did not talk about medals or commendations or the Bronze Star he had earned. He walked slowly to a locked cabinet in his study and pulled out a velvet-lined box that had sat there for decades. Inside lay a blade, etched with words in a language he had never learned to speak. Meine Ehre heißt Treue, my honor is loyalty. The motto of the SS, the dagger that meant more to him than anything else he brought home from 4 years of war across 3 continents. Because that dagger was evidence. Evidence that he had faced the enemy everyone feared. Evidence that he had survived when so many had not. Evidence that he had won. Evidence that evil, no matter how powerful it appears, no matter how certain its victory seems, can be defeated by ordinary men willing to stand against it. That dagger was not a souvenir, it was a testament. And that is why Allied soldiers valued it above almost anything else they could capture. That is why they risked their lives to obtain them. That is why, 8 decades after the last shot was fired, we still remember what they mean.